It's great to see so many hardy poetry fans out on a rather miserable evening. I'm Kathleen O'Toole, and I think I've met most of you, but as of August, I'm the new Poet Laureate of Takoma Park, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight welcoming four very accomplished and very different poets. It's been lovely already in the last two readings, and again tonight, that we've got such variety of poetic voices in the house. I decided tonight I'm going to ask you to indulge me to open with a very short excerpt of a poem that's been on my mind lately. Today would have been my brother Kevin's 61st birthday. We lost him sadly last year. And the poem that I read at his memorial service in March was the poem Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye, which I'm sure many of you poets know. And it's been on my mind a lot because of the lack of kindness, I think, in a lot of our public discourse. So I won't read the whole poem, but I'd love to have the opportunity to, on my brother's birthday, acknowledge a part of his nature that I hope for all of us by reading this section. And for those of you that don't know it, you can Google it because it's all over. There are YouTube videos and recordings, and it's on the web. So this is an excerpt from Naomi Shihab Nye's poem Kindness as a wish for all of us tonight. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. So tonight, I'd like to introduce to you four poets, and you have their biographies and lovely photographs in the program. I just want to say a word about each of them. I won't interrupt the flow. We'll go in alphabetical order, and each poet will read for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to invite you to meet the poets and maybe ask them any questions that you have and have some refreshments. And I know a couple of them have actually brought books to sell. So tonight, our lineup includes Kateema Lee, who is a DC native and remembers reading here in 2006. Kateema, good memory. And whose poems have been published in a lot of local journals and has a chapbook coming out soon from Finishing Line Press, which is a wonderful press. Sunil Freeman, also from the area, but very connected, I hear, to the Bethesda, the Writer Center in Bethesda for many years. And Sunil's books are listed here. And I think you have read here before, right, Sunil, some time ago? And in this series. Okay, so we're welcoming Sunil to Takoma Park and celebrating his accomplishments and many publications in this area. John Morris is a local Takoma Park guy, right, John? Part of the Takoma Park community, a musician and a writer, and also connected to the Writers Center. And you'll see the long list of his publications. And he has not only books tonight, but CDs to share with you. And then Lily Scialom-Herman. And Lily is new to us and to this series, but has connections here to College Park, to the University. No, I'm mixing you up, right? This is College Park. Lily's from Baltimore. That's right. Lily gets the prize for getting here in the rain tonight from Baltimore and is new to the series, and so we welcome her. And I'll have to find out later what the hoop skirt of Baltimore is, but we're delighted to have her here tonight closing us. So, Kateema, would you like to begin?
Hello. All right. So it's good to be back. Like I was telling Catherine, right? Kathleen. This is my second time reading here in Takoma Park, but I lived in Takoma Park for about 15 years, and I miss it. I actually moved out to Germantown. I'm going to start with a few poems that I'm working on for my new manuscript. And they're about a series, it's kind of dark, but they're about a series of murders that happened in the Washington, D.C. area in the early 70s, a little bit before my time, but it's known as the Freeway Phantom murders. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, every decade or so, it's talked about. And so I feel like we need to remember these girls. And so I wrote a few poems about that. The first one is Transcript of the Unnamed. And the epigraph reads, "You better bet that if these had been white girls, the police would have solved the cases. Evander Spinks, a sister of the first Freeway Phantom victim. 1. Destiny. We are told we are daughters of Ham, and we carry his sins in our womb. Each birth unearths another like us, destined to be punished. 2. Fate. They were chosen at random. He saw them walking, that's all it took, a brilliant brown body walking to the store, fragile as fireflies in wind. All he had to do was open his jar, tilt it ever so slightly to add another one to his collection. 3. Loss. In the district on the A bus, a little girl asked, if I disappear, would anyone look for me? Her mother, wearing long cornrows in pride, tells her child she would break the world, turn over buses and buildings, knock down the big chair to find her. The girl smiles, squeezes her mother's hand, waits for her turn to pull the cord. 4. Prayer. Daughters of Ham wearing church hats pray their babies come home safe, that God bless the child lost to the streets, the child left like trash on the side of the road, the child who is one of 4 with a mother who is still a child. They pray on Sundays as the organ plays, their faith safe between clasped hands. They say amen and hallelujah. With the wisdom of oracles, they sing hymns to unburden their souls and the souls of those to come. Kneeling in prayer, hands so tight, even loss couldn't break the seal. Poem Where We Are Fireflies. He pulls wings off fireflies, whimsically catching them. He jumps joyously in the air, cupping his hands together, jailing them between his palms. He marvels at their light, how their brilliance disappears, then reappears between tight grips and blinks. It is said we are endangered, losing battle after battle to his innocent hands, only surviving long enough to light each other's path. Epistle from a Missing Woman. When you file the report, tell them my eyes are unsolved cases, my mouth a missing woman, my head disembodied, Karen's middle finger, the crossways of Acheron my hair. The building blocks of my face are tragedy at first glance. My neck can hold the weight of Anacostia. Sincerely unnamed. Poem Where We Are Butterflies. Sometimes we find ourselves in places flowers rarely bloom. Sometimes we don't know the difference between pungent rot or honeyed sunflower or spring garden or window flower pot. We live to land on something, to leave something behind, to repeat the cycle, to live a brief, bright life. Okay, so this next poem is an ekphrastic poem, and it's based on Botticelli's painting of Venus and also a painter, Colin Garland's Sable Venus, and also Lucille Clifton's poem, Homage to My Hips. Eyes avert from the sight of her form, from the shape of her waist to the curve of her thighs, her free hips crafted in the image of man's imagination, of God's imagination of woman. There's a rush to clothe her in her imagined shame. Some parts of her are still a cloth-covered guarded secret. Each time some part of her is exposed, many are outraged, afraid of what may come, afraid of what it means to be bare and unafraid. As white Venus rises from the foam, her body exposed to eyes and elements, no one looks away, and viewers praise the brilliance of the sea. But the breast of a brown body stops many in their place and leads to the fear that comes with wanting to look away, but looking anyway, like a wardrobe malfunction during a halftime show. Her uncovered breast and the round of her hips welcome the wind, the gloss of the sun. She is on her way to shore. No one, God or mortal, can stop her. This next poem is from a series of poems that I wrote about living in DC. I'm a DC native, lived in Maryland most of my life, and so I've been writing a series of poems about the changing city, and I think it's in the brochure. Elegy for Chocolate City. Her city used to be sweet, dark luxury, but some streets were sour, known for their bitter taste. Her city was sublet, many names on the lease, native, non-natives. Her name was Clenched Fist. Her city was ambassador of Quan. Quan lived on MLK near the asylum. Some seek asylum from politicians' wet dreams, dreams of sitting on top a hill too high for people like her to climb, a climb with a steep decline, a decline steeper than rent, rent subsidized by bodies and grime, grime at the bottom of basins. The basin is not far from Lincoln. Lincoln freed the slaves, and slaves built the city. The city built slaves and placed them in projects. Projects were night. Night soundtrack was bullets. Bullets changed their name to wizards. Wizards did not cast spells or grant wishes. Some wished for mumble sauce on wings. Wings were needed things in her city, so needed she tried to fashion them from loss. And I'm going to end with one poem. It's kind of a tone shift here, but it's a fun poem, so we can end on a lighter note. And it's from my new chapbook, Musings of a Netflix Binge Viewer. And it's the title poem for the book, Musings of a Netflix Binge Viewer. B movies with buxom beauties, beefy bodies, B movies with buxom beauties, beefy bodies, dialogue be damned, circled like rainbow-colored wheels before falling off the queue. Zombies wishing there were no more zombie movies, bit, clawed, groaned, limped, spurted, danced, pumped gas, walked underwater, walked through walls, chased Barbara while on fire, while waiting for that one girl to live or fall and scream, show side boob, grab an axe, save the day before falling off the queue. Queequeg, Cylons, Fry, Worf, that misfit who travels through time to let the right one in to see dragons tattoo men from nowhere. Buffering. An error occurred loading this content. Set alarm, buy a caramel macchiato, pray for snow, repair the motherboard's mind, delete cookies, clear the cache, live. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can people hear me? Good. I loved your poems, Kateema. Thanks for reading. Thanks to everybody who put the series together. I've read in Takoma Park a few times over the decades, actually, but I believe this is the first time in the series here, in the third Thursday series. As my parents are both passed away now, November is a significant month for me in a lot of ways because it's their birthday for both of them. And sometimes I think about the fact that they were born, my father in Raleigh, North Carolina, November 1st, 1921, and 3 weeks later, November 21st, 1921, my mother was born in Benares, India. And the fact that they met at a refugee camp and she said yes after 3 years of saying no, thank you, Mom, was just something that's significant. And I've been thinking about that. And some of these poems they're not about them, but they sort of circle back to some aspects about them when my father died and my mother was sometime after that moving into a nursing home, various things got shifted to my sisters and to me. They're both musicians, so the cello, the violin, and the piano went to my sisters. I, as the more writerly one of the three of us, got several books, including Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. My father was not a communist, but he was pretty far to the left. And the beautiful signed photograph of Rabindranath Tagore, and a lot of videos. It included nature videos, videos that my father had made from TV, nature videos, history videos, politics videos, science, and in the middle of all of that, and it really surprised me, was a Bob Marley live in concert video. And I'd never heard my father speak about Bob Marley, but I'm sure that he was attracted to it because of the politics of Bob Marley that he had heard about. But I'll open with what I call my very first Bob Marley poem. I haven't written any other Bob Marley poems, but there's a reference to marijuana, which is slowly becoming legal. And I note to everybody whenever I read this that it's a fictional poem, and I've never smoked pot in a Caribbean island. So there we go. My very first Bob Marley poem. Never really liked reggae till I was down in the islands, sun doing a powerful baking thing on the beach, but sweet, friendly, like watercolors in first grade, when golden rays flowed from that smiley face in the upper right corner. The grain of the paper grew crinkly with water like would-be waves. The real waves rocked a big womb pulse rhythm. When I closed my eyes, the shimmer of sun translated to the sound of waves, broken and broken, a silvery sound in that spray. An old friend from the plant kingdom put a spin that eased the sun to take it on down past skin and muscle. I drifted there a while, and then some. When the drifting stopped, I stayed there, too. I wore no watch, so my eyes opened when the time was ripe. Indoors, I'd have observed diamonds, triangles, all the shapes light makes as it plays through the stencils of a room. Outside, I saw the slow tilt to evening. A lone gull seemed to signal a hush, and then the sound came. Bob Marley, no woman, no cry. Organ like an ocean or a breeze. Bass like a pull of tide. Voice like some mythic bird. That big old song, so down home, it was geology, scripture of this living earth. Bob Marley and Dad. For about 10 years, I had easily 100, maybe 200 tornado dreams. And then they eventually stopped for whatever reason, I don't really know. But I've always been curious about the tornado dreams and how they happened. One of the first ones, I was trying to get health insurance. I was about 30 years old. I've had health insurance most all of my life. But I was getting denied because of my pre-existing condition. And when I wrote back to a health insurance company why I was being denied, I got basically a 1 or 2 sentence letter back saying, "Dear Mr. Freeman, this is in response to your query about our rejection of your health insurance. We do not offer health insurance to people with ankylosing spondylitis." I'd probably be dead by now, years ago, if I hadn't been able to get the health insurance. So here's to health insurance. Well, here's to health care, not health insurance, health care. That's part of the political part of my show, so to speak. And my parents every now and then would come to my readings, and actually in a reading in Takoma Park, in the DC Takoma Park Library many, many years ago, both of them were there, and I'd wanted to write a tornado poem. This is completely fictional with little snippets of fact, and my father thanked me afterward for letting everybody know it was fictional. My father's father was a Baptist preacher, and his father was a Baptist preacher too. And this is a fictional poem, and as both my parents were in the audience, my father was very grateful. The Preacher's Son and the Tornado. The sky's a dark, lumpy mattress. Then he sees the original serpent corkscrewed into a drill in the hands of a God gone Old Testament. No quarter, no surrender. The preacher's son is just out of college. A splinter from his heart squirts up into a drop of spit. 2 decades distill into 2 gulps for air. The day in 6th grade, he proved himself with the class toughs. They caught crayfish and burned them in gasoline, threw them through the flaming, half-alive clawing husks on 2 3rd graders. Nights, rock and roll down low on the car radio, perfume like a close memory of honeysuckle patches beside asphalt so moist he could almost feel it breathe. And Mary Ellen, the girl who let him go all the way. Later, alone, he prayed himself to sleep. Tonight, he'll fall back into himself, but now his heart is only Jesus, 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 as he watches and waits for the sound of 1,000 freight trains. You can imagine Flora Freeman in the car. Charles, who was Mary Ellen? In my teens, I grew to love the wilder side of avant-garde jazz. And I think that was partly because my dad loved the music of Charles Ives. Do folks here know Charles Ives' music? Sort of wild and crazy avant-garde music. And for my sisters and I, it was definitely Daddy's crazy music. But over the time, we grew to love it. And that's a good thing to do, to stretch things out in a lot of ways. My love of late Coltrane and Cecil Taylor and others came about 2 years before the arthritis hit. And I think something about turning dissonant, furious sound into ecstasy was helpful in terms of dealing with pain. So that's a little autobiography in music. This poem, one other bit of news about that is that I loved Athens when we were in Athens for a while, going to and from India, and I hated Rome. And I hated Rome because one afternoon we went into a dungeon where the first generation Christians were tortured, and I got a terrible headache. And when I was about 30, and I didn't tell anybody about the headache or about that experience. And when I was about 40 years old, 35, 40 years old, I was visiting my folks, and my mother, out of the blue, said, "You know, I really didn't like Rome because I got a terrible headache after we went down into that dungeon and heard those stories." So we both carried that together without knowing it for all those years. Saxophone poem, Translucence. Sax squeals on a chord slide and skitters on down, tongue trembling way past tired on the reed. Brake slam sound that wails on loose, underneath a bass, beyond broken ice and far-off chatter. Down like a memory of stained glass, cathedral cool, damp and stone, and country rustle and hum beyond those. Brightness perhaps, and hushed below it, a slow ground foul of sound, back there out past windows. In the bar, the old sax just out again, to not quite over the edge, a car on ice, like a slide that might be a groove of sorts, though it takes a curvy stutter on a forgotten road. Stairs, winding like DNA, down to a dungeon where Christians died so hard. I hated Rome. Or a scuttle sound, crawfish on pebbles, current a deep roar above. It seals their little taps, flecks of gold caught in a ray or two under whitewater pockets. Translucency is everywhere, like wearing old contact lenses, to see a blue sky through a film that floats. In the bar, smokiness that might be home, a dart shines, pings into cork just right, and the guy says, yes, arm extended to hold the moment. It's funny, if I read this to a younger crowd, they won't know a smoky bar. It's really interesting how things change and words change and meanings change. Next, I'm going to read Man in Frayed Sweater, Homelessness. It's crazy. What the man in the frayed sweater might be thinking. Metrobus, February. His eyes shift like he's tracking reflections, so I look at the motion picture mirrored in the glass. Translucent buses and cars, rundown ghost pedestrians who keep on walking, a cartoon world. He stares out the window as an armada of cumulus clouds races across the sky. Riffles of cirrus might be ripples on a wind-tossed lake. Lampposts, grayish-white, suggest sycamores. The window reflects rectangular chunks of sky, like some old avant-garde photograph. The man's in his late 30s. Watching him is like seeing pictures of European Jews before Kristallnacht. He's alive, for now. The way he turns his head, I'm pretty sure he's noticed the whine by the left back wheel sounds like a Middle Eastern translation of the blues. Miles Davis could have polished it into something unforgettable. When his eyes close, I think of waiting for buses, how the cold hammers a man to a place where warmth, when it arrives barreling down the road, triggers a drone which begins in bone marrow and spreads till his temples are those of a child. And when that buzz synchronizes with the hum of the bus, he closes his eyes, alive and not hurting, and that's enough. I'll read just a couple more poems. Wash. I was fortunate. My father and my sisters and I went to the big anti-war demonstrations, the Vietnam demonstrations. It's so weird to be marching on those same streets like 30 years later. It's very disconcerting and just a very odd feeling. But for about 5 or 6 years, I was involved with a writing program at Walter Reed and got to know a lot of veterans who lead those writing workshops there. And I wrote this long before that, actually. It's titled Wash, and I wrote it after reading a news account of a soldier's mother who learned to keep his clothes unwashed. The rehabilitation of George Bush is appalling. I'll just say that for the record. They wash the scent away. His clothes come clean. No blood or sweat, just fading memories. Her baby's hair she kissed on summer days. The creek bank mud that stained his old blue jeans. The blood from Little League, the hard slide home that won a game so long ago. The cheers and how he didn't cry, his legs scraped raw. There was a child went forth, Walt Whitman said. He could have been that boy 10 years ago. His senses all embraced the world, but now a man. And Whitman knew his war up close. Before they washed the scent away, he told it hard, with grief, but not as mean as those who'd fly the bodies back at night unseen. And I'll close with, I've only once written a sonnet, but I'll close with the one sonnet. I must have been about 7 years old or so, and I was at the breakfast table, and my mom had breakfast and was going to go to school, and she was looking at me really strange, and she said, "You shouted in the middle of the night. You just bellowed out." I don't think she used the word bellowed, but I shouted out the words, "The ship shall sail at dawn." And I was just a little kid, but about 50 years later, I realized that was iambic. And so here we go. Thanks you, everybody, for coming on this lovely day, and thanks for the invitation to read here. 6 syllables, iambic. The ship shall sail at dawn. The dream long gone, those words remain, a riddle left that calls me back through years to know the boy who on that night had shouted out the news for all to hear. A ship would sail, but was the child to stand on shore and wave goodbye to those he loved? Or board and ride the sea to wild adventures, distant moonrise, hidden coves? I knew the boy, but not the dream. The words I called now pull me back like emeralds, a glow that reached from darkest night, a herd refrain. The ship, the dawn, a flock of gulls perhaps? Now I come back to touch that night and praise the force that calls those words to light. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Thank you for coming on this wretched evening to hear some poetry. I appreciate it very much. I'm also so pleased to be sharing the stage with these other wonderful poets. I forget sometimes how important it is to hear poetry read aloud until I hear good poems being read aloud, so thank you. I'll begin with a poem called Heroics, and I guess I should explain for those of you who are not my age that some 50 years ago, which is the setting of this poem, the word bum was used, and the word bum applied to homeless people because, at least in my circles, nobody knew any better. So you will hear that word used, and that's the context. Heroics. This drunk bum was up on a stoop, tried to come down, but tripped and tumbled, sprawled in a smelly heap at my father's feet. A rich, bright line of blood appeared and moved down over his forehead. He groaned at the winter sky. I was 8 or so. My father asked another passerby to call an ambulance, and then he took off his old olive drab army jacket and draped it over the bum. We waited, my father down on one knee, keeping an eye on the wound until the ambulance came. The bum was dumped on a stretcher and wheeled to the curb, and just before he got loaded in, my father retrieved his army jacket. He put it right back on as if nothing had happened to it, and I could see it wasn't stained, and when I leaned against him and sniffed, it didn't smell. That jacket had gone through World War II with him, the Pacific Theater. All the rest of the day, I kept seeing the blood appear and move. I like reading blurbs on books, partially because I think they're pretty funny, and they are a form, if you will. There's a certain form to writing a blurb for a book. And so I got to thinking, what if you could write blurbs for other things besides books? What might that be like? For instance, what if you could blurb an entire love affair, perhaps in descending sequence of success? So I thought maybe there's a poem there. So this is what I came up with. It's called Love Blurbs. Fascinating, brilliant, beautiful, unlike anything I've ever seen before. I was up all night with this one. Uncompromising yet charming, her style is irresistible. I couldn't put her down. Can't wait to see more of her work. A new tone of realism, at times grim, but always frank, pervades her latest. The mature commitment to character and complex themes is unsettling and powerful. Flashes of ... wit and ... insight enliven this stark family chronicle. A demanding tale full of the drama and conflict we've come to expect from her. Disappointing. The protagonists are hard to admire or even like. Her promising debut is only recalled in certain phrases and poignant details. I was prepared to love this one, but had trouble finishing it. And I was glad when it was over. Thank you. I like writing formal poetry in addition to free verse. There's something about using meter and rhyme that perversely makes me feel more free, more creative. So I'll read a couple of formal poems. This one is called The Lodger, and it's got a little bit of a family story to it. My great aunt rumor has it, took in a lodger when she was very old because she needed to make ends meet. And he was also an old fellow. And something weird happened. We never quite got the story. The story that was told was her lodger went mad. And we heard one or two other details, and so I've based the poem just on that much. So, the lodger. She sensed a figure in the room. Before the lamp went out, a poem had inched across her memory from early in the century when she was young. I am dreaming. The light was gathered in the room unevenly, a little here and there thicker. The comforter fell from her fingertips, speech impossible. She saw a thatch of grizzled hair above his parts. As the light moved with him in the dark, she saw his chin, bare, knobby chest, belly. My lodger's mad. Her sense of what was light and what was dark abandoned her. Now she could talk. She said his name. They were both 80. Daily greetings, rent paid the month's first morning, in cash. A "that's done" nod from his neat mustache as he took himself back down the hall and shut his door. Their mutual respect for privacy was not petty or rigid. She didn't mind the Verdi operas he liked to play, always the same ones, identically scratched and pocked, and his lips pressed tight. I could say much as he kibitzed from east to north to west to dummy, circling her weekly foursome. She said his name, but he only took a small step closer. The floor spoke, changing what was light and what was not. My lodger's mad. His lips pale, yet so imploring, as if by taking off his clothing and crossing the hall and letting the light touch him in wrinkled, pale, private places, he meant to ask a question. She felt no fear at all. At breakfast, she served his coffee, offered cream, and asked him how he'd slept. I dreamed, he said, and sipped. Frowning, he stopped. She watched him place the sloshing cup back in its saucer, touch the knot of his dark green tie. She called his daughter, and on the first of the following month, she had no lodger. Surely death would take him soon out of the home. Vivid at night, poem after poem returned to her. She felt her youth retrieve itself. Surely death would send him naked through the air to haunt her. She started to prepare. This one's a sonnet too. Thank you for sharing yours, Sunil. I feel a bit daunted, but I'll read mine anyway. It's called Divorce. They made the vow at City Hall, Manhattan, June 46, ring, license. The JP invoked obedience, honor, fidelity till death do you part. I do. And that was that, and no one there to cry. The bridegroom lied. He never meant to honor her. She never did obey him. They staggered on, tethered for 54 sad, ragged years, and died 8 weeks apart. They're with each other now forever, says the priest. The JP spoke a kinder truth, I think. The earthly blunder stopped with heaven. Death revoked the vow my parents never kept and never broke. Let none re-yoke what God has pulled us under. A while back I saw that the greeting cards in stores were getting really specific in their purposes. Lots of very deliberate advertising schemes for them, apparently. So that conjured up a fantasy on a theme by Hallmark. Some are hallowed and familiar: birthday, happy anniversary, and sympathy, the one we all will need. But recently, the colored cardboard placards placed to segregate the neighborhoods, each ethnic group of greeting cards descending in rows from its descriptor. Recently, these signposts have taken to marking curious new developments of sensibility. The cards themselves suck, of course. And so I offered a stone clerk $20, and now I send the cardboard signs instead. Cope is useful, a stern imperative, and suitable for remarriage has a tart ambiguity, her or me. Money holder, mailed without comment, speaks its reproof to mean acquaintances. Best of all, the series I have lived so many times and never known how to subdivide and signify. Now I send more than friends, then new love, humor, God I guess is laughing, then troubled love, then sorry, a final noble, sweet effort across the miles, and then the truth, blank inside. Okay. Yeah, just a couple more, I guess. They're short. Indoor cats. Like indoor cats, we're curious and scared to get on the wrong side of the front door. We stare out the window and don't know the names. We remember those times we were transported into that bright, windy world. Doors slammed, motors gunned, and at journey's end, someone hurt us for our own good as we hissed and writhed. Now and then, the door swings open. We know we could squeeze through. We give the porch a bitter glance, then make a fuss, asking for kibble and a lap. Thank you so much. I will end with a poem that seems to get truer every year since I've written it. It's called Only Passing Through. Books were tough bones once. They kept you upright, gave you something strong beneath your easily insulted flesh. You finished a good book and it was yours, part of the skeleton, the articulation of self. You could feel it when you pressed hard. And a lifetime of years and words go by, and now books refresh you. They cleanse and cool. They're like sprinklers you ran through as a child on a summer morning, reflecting whatever light is already there. The brief aha. Nothing you'd ever keep or want to. You forget them as soon as they're read. Who can remember every sun shower? Yes, you say of a recent book. I think I read that last year. I recall liking it. It was good, wasn't it? And it's becoming true of music, too, and places and thoughts. The gleaming lawn, the mirrored light, and you only passing through. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lily. I don't get any of the references from 30 years ago, and I don't get any of the DC references. It is relevant to these poems to say that my husband committed suicide in January. My biggest fear is that someone will break into my house, bind my wrists, gag my mouth, and force me to keep being the same person I've always been. May this union serve to eliminate the need for a warning that poems, like life, are sometimes violent, sexual, or boring, to degrees considered technically legal but universally in poor taste. Sometimes you get attached to a character destined for the second tier, whose fate is never intended to transcend the realm of collateral damage. Consider that grief is not an era, but a room that keeps growing to accommodate you. The efficacy of the phrase, strike while the iron is hot, goes out the window if the addendum isn't implicit, you don't strike yourself. Why bother with a new driver's license in every state if you're just going to end up being the same man? A woman who smiled once when her son was born and has not smiled again since. A woman alternating between having just the thing for it and asking one more time to clarify what it is. Standing on a platform, he says, ultimately an altruist. Inheriting the platform, he says, but she never had the votes. Sometimes I think I can put an end to your death by neglecting it as a subject. Last night she tried to say that no one wants to live forever, and last night she was right. But if not mourning, and if not augmentative desire, then what have we been a part of all this time? I covet my inheritance, to suffer with no end in sight, as all patriots are protective of their country. And besides, I'm comfortable wanting things which everyone wants, but are not nice to name. Like all unincorporated animals, I can change directions on the silent pads of my feet, this country's money cut in half. There is no feeling about which I do not wish myself capable of writing, only feelings about which I'd prefer to write secondhand. Weighed against the word peace invoked without weight, there is a vision of love. If you can learn to operate one machine which confounds the rest of the workers, you will never be replaced. I am demonic with work. I admit I want to have a biographer, which is the filth that follows where immortality treads. I want the lens on me to show unprecedented mercy, and still for there to be no errors in accuracy. A morning past the park, the only blossoms left in late summer strain into their purples. After all the more discreet signals have been flushed and flooded out, life remains mentionable. Us in our possible iterations chanting, nothing subtle can stay. Take the poem you never put back, pellucid, putrefying as only desire can putrefy. Here I have killed death, but a body before you is always a body, and what comes after. The news report says, in Wales, a mountain has been downgraded to a hill. Elsewhere, there is still war, or war has temporarily ceased, or war has changed directions, or is unrecognizable when fought amongst women. To come from a place with no land and no language is not to come from a place of no stories. You say, find some way to bring the wound out, and I think I was hoping to find some place to occasionally put it away. But since you have it, Anne Sexton already said wanting to die in the 3 words that fit it. Miloš handled the cobblestones which cannot be picked up if they are ever to be put back down, and then spent many hours speaking on the difference between a poet who lifted cobblestones once and a poem who, as a matter of course, lifts cobblestones. And besides, it was another army in those days, uncoupling not only cobbles from their streets, but streets from their cities. Not him. He was only the poet who saw in a long tradition of poets who woefully can't help but see. And another army separates men from their countries. As a butterfly's wings become unsuited for future flight after the oil of human hands has touched them, the subtle but cherished belief that the right word for the beast will keep it from eating you. Whatever history might have to say about Clytemnestra, it was Aeschylus who killed Agamemnon. In the translation fourth most dear to me, Jeffers says, permitted to live because I'm crying to die. But in every version, it is the wife who puts the knife face first through history. So here I am, killing you. There. Find another father, one unheard of, one unmentionable. Father me first for what you will later do. Not to make right, because like all fathers, you make nothing, but give freely of what comes free to you. Say to me a single congratulations, divorced of becominghood. The truth is that shame is bloodless and blood a relief. Find that some flesh rolls in your palm, while the sickly kind is still as an empire against the tides. This is the worried for and fatherless skin. Consider the limited chances to be descended from what you are not. Fly suddenly under a second flag. Lose in your body's mutiny against you, aware that even in that pillaged country there must be some survivors, wondering with what measure of mercy the new rulers will dispense with them. Die, and your doctors will know they did not love you, only listened. Your head will prove itself, not melon but pomegranate, its seeds red and rare. The freedom to wake up still your wife in a world without you. The chance to fail at motherhood without giving birth, choiceless, baseless milk body. Impurity sifted to the toes and back, disavowed but not permitted to cross entirely out of the city's western quarter. Milk body, blood body, shit and shirt-waist body. Next to the latrine, a baby cries not for having been orphaned, but for experiencing a family nearly parent, nearly peer. Body of forgiveness, body of awful. Find the first words after a year married to silence. The teacup that matches the saucer. Conscious now of how I take my coffee without you. Now I'm the engineer of a vacant city. Where there is no building, I must improve upon it. The rules have never really changed. Not a matter of either or. The rules are do this and die trying. And this is the last poem I'm going to read. Buttoned without reprieve into my jumpsuit, the way you were nailed without nails into your coffin, I tie our car with tin cans and inscribe, just buried, above the bumper. There is nothing now but where we started and this. Heat working mercenarily against the eye, a woman mistaking desert for sea, an easterly wind blown against a building whose entire structure alternates generationally toward and away from God. The story of a day is he met and married his wife. The story of that day is fat squeezing through a fine sieve, unlike most materials, more pliable when cold. She asks, but is it a turning point? And I say, I thought it was that all life is a turning point toward death. No one tells you what book to write when the affair doesn't cut, even conceptually, to the quick. To keep the lights on in love, to sit at the edge of a garden untouched by the interior, veiled, christened woman searching an azalea for scent. To satisfy one's own urge for multicolored tulips in an uncrowded urn, to falsify the rest of one's urges. A list of terms prohibited from today's vanity license plates archived instead for tomorrow's tombstones. Your industry upon finding my body. Imagined paradise, imagined purple. A woman distributing wild garlic from the hull of her sadness, secretary of her own hardship. I asked what you needed to keep going, and you said no, it just runs out. And thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone else for reading.
Please join me in thanking Lily, John, Kateema, and Sunil for reading tonight. And for giving us this hour of escape and wonder and pondering in spite of the miserable rain around us. So we'd like for you to continue in the warm glow of our company by joining us for refreshments tonight, by chatting with the poets. And I know at least 2 poets have brought books to sell. And one other, Sunil says, just ask me and I'll tell you how to get them. So please do find some time to chat with the poets, buy a book if you can, have some refreshments. And I have a couple of events to call your attention to. First, if you're really having a poetry thing this week, you can come back here tomorrow night for the Workers' Poetry Fest, which will be in this space at 7:30 with some wonderful poets and politics and celebration of the world of work and the way in which poetry interacts with the value and the threats to workers, I guess I would say. So that's tomorrow night. And then on the 30th, November 30th, there is the Mystical Poets Concert, which you can read a description of here, but sounds like it's a wonderful mix of poetry and music, and with some real international flair. And the holiday art sale is coming up, and some other great events. And once again, I want to thank my colleagues from the Takoma Park Arts and Humanities Commission and the staff for supporting these readings. And I hope you'll come back next month for our pre-Christmas, I'm not sure if it's pre or during Hanukkah, I haven't checked, but our pre-holiday poetry reading, and we can join once again in great company and great words. Thanks.